Aquinas is a good person to jump back on with. He really is as powerful an intellect as one will find it in history. And he is, by church law, the gold standard for theological research in the Catholic Church. So I am very versed in the thought of Aquinas. He is a constant and necessary reference point for me, but I think his attainments in terms of spiritual depth, they would benefit anyone. Now, one of the ironic things, and you see this not just with Aquinas, you see this in many of the greatest theologians of church history, that the drama of the ages in which they live don't obviously show up in the work. And here we have, in the 13th century, the high point of the High Middle Ages, a century full of drama, and yet it's hard to feel that in something like the Summa Theologica, but it's there, and hopefully that can come through. I mean, part of the response that Thomas Aquinas is making to these massive changes, the consolidation of the reurbanization of Europe, and so on, and the great struggle between the Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope, that affected his life personally, because he was trained. The first university education he had was in the court, in the university that was set up by Frederick II, who would be targeted by the popes. Theology was the prestige science of the age. So as people recognized the power of his intellect, he was acknowledged as a person in Western Europe to be accounted for. The powers of the world looked to theologians to see what they had to say. Whether that's a good or bad thing, I'll let you decide. But it's probably good that intellectuals had some effect. Aquinas, in the Treatise on Happiness, which is the section we've got from the beginning of the Secunda Pars, the second part of the Summa of Theology, the Summa Theologiae, which he left unfinished at his death, but what we have is an immense accomplishment. He is exploring the great question that frames the classic conversation on how should we live. What is happiness, right? What is this thing that all human beings want? We have a name for that. More than, say, if you were to ask, what do people call the ultimate principle of reality? God will be given by many traditions as an answer to that, but happiness will be given as the answer to what are you looking for by virtually everyone. And that is, if you want a starting point for a conversation about how to live, this is it. Happiness. What is happiness? And that's what Aquinas is going through systematically here. He's asking which goods qualify as meeting that desire. Are they the external goods that we know of, right? Wealth, honor, glory, power. Are they goods of the body, health, pleasure? Are they goods of the intellect? And he goes through all of them. And I think he goes through them in a way that is extremely illuminating, even if one doesn't agree completely with his results. Now, one has to grant him that he's working with in a most systematic context. When he says, I want to talk about what's essential to happiness, he means essential. That's a very technical term. So if I, as I did when I first encountered these questions, might be a little annoyed right off the bat and saying, well, aren't friends essential to happiness? The body. Isn't the body essential to happiness, or the ultimate fulfillment of human being? Well, he's going to say very precisely, based on dogmatic Catholic Christian commitments and also reason, based on reason, that, for instance, the body isn't essential. And he would say this, he makes two pairs of distinctions in these questions, right, between imperfect and perfect happiness. And one thing people say, and it's true, of course, Aquinas is deeply Aristotelian, but he's also deeply Augustinian, right? I mean, the fact is he's both. That's why he's such a touchstone in the history of thought. He's able to reconcile the two things that we've seen in Maimonides, Al-Ghazali, right? In those other traditions, we've seen it with Abelard. In the Christian tradition, the medieval quest to balance reason and revelation. Well, Aquinas reaches a high point by balancing, if you want to name it here, Augustine as representing that more pietistic, more revelationally slanted position, and Aristotle is representing the claims of human reason, and he balances them. He's fully committed to. Well, I would say he's fully committed to both, but he is more committed to the Christian revelation than he is to Aristotle, and that's the point. He isn't like the masters of the arts faculty who were flirting with or even outright claiming that the claims of philosophical reason trump those of revelation. He's keeping a balance, and a balance that opens the way to, yes, the secular world order. He's been criticized by evangelicals for this, that he opens up the possibility of a secular world order, and that he does, because he says that natural reason has its correlate in natural intelligibilities, and that you don't have to be Christian to see things about reality. And that does open up the modern West, and that's a fact, for good and ill. But the consequences are one thing. The fact is he's chartering the claims of reason within the context of the claims of faith. He wants to keep a relative autonomy of natural intelligibilities and reason's ability to reach those. Okay, and so he's very confident about reason. And that's one of the things that he's able to be serene, supremely serene in his systematic writings, in an age of that was very vital, very unsettled, because he believes that reason is a great instrument given by God to attain to reality. So you can feel the joy of a man who loves God's glory as it shines forth in things and in how things are. One thing you have to, in that systematic context that he has, one thing is his anthropology, as we call it in theology, that is his view of the human person. And it's very important here. That is, you've got two sources of knowledge. You've got intellect and senses, intellect being ratio. And here I do want to make an adversion that I was kind of groping for a rapprochement between the modern Catholic sensibility of putting the Trinity right out there and Aquinas. And I think there's a lot to say about that, but I may have been a little too confident. That is, the Augustinian is going to say there is a lot more to knowing than ratio, than reason. There is going to be this ability, this intellectus, this insight, this intuition. And Thomas is really leery about that. And it's a work in progress for me to try to think about how ratio maps onto nous, and that is the Greek word for mind, that the great breakthrough that brought philosophy into existence. But that's relevant here, because when he talks about the two operations, the two ways we come to know things, you've got ratio and you've got sense, the senses. So we come to know things by perceiving them, and we come to know things by thinking about them. And in this world, you can't get thinking without the sensing. He's a good Aristotelian in that respect. He's actually maybe more Aristotelian than Aristotle. He's very empiricistic. Actually, he is. I mean, he doesn't have a lot for intuition, and Aristotle actually has that in the breakdown. So that's it. So when he quotes Aristotle, he says, you can't have thinking, reasoning without a phantasm, that is, without a sense image to work on. All of our knowledge comes to the senses. That is an absolute given for Aquinas as far as knowing in this life. So from the two sources of knowing, you have two kinds of desiring. From senses you get, that is when you sense things in the world, you have a sense appetite. And then that gives rise to the two impulses that are formed by the two lower cardinal virtues, that is fortitude and temperance. That is, you sense something and you're either afraid of how difficult it is to get the good, or the thing that's going to threaten your enjoyment or attainment of the good. And that's where you got anger to try to be shaped by courage, or you just see a thing that looks really good and you incline to it, you want it, and that's the impulse that has to be shaped by temperance. Okay. There is a correlative appetite that follows from rational knowing, and that's will, and that's the very kind of rational appetite is Aquinas's definition of will, and that's really different from, that's faculty psychology. These are faculties of the soul, powers of the soul, and he's saying that these follow in a very specific way. He's got an openness to an older vision, which is Augustinian, right? The vision that the will is something more primal than that. It's something that you identify with the heart, that primordial love. What you love is who you are. You get traces of that in Aquinas, but it doesn't work in his thought systematically. So that has to be taken into account because it's very present in this discussion. When he says that happiness consists in the fulfillment of the highest part in us, which is the intellect, he's going to do something that follows along with Aristotle, but in a way completely revolutionizes what Aristotle says. So Aristotle's definition of happiness is activity of the soul in accordance with virtue throughout life. Aquinas believes that, but that really identifies imperfect happiness. That is happiness as we can attain it under conditions of temporality, time, embodiment, here and now. Aquinas really, the thing that he believes is the end that we all want is the beatific vision, which is the vision that makes us happy. Beatifies us means to make us happy, blessed. And that means, I don't think it comes out in these selections here, the beatific vision technically is when the essence, the divine essence, the essence of God becomes the form of our knowing. So when we come to know a sense object, that sense, the thing we sense forms our sensibility, and then we sense it. When we come to know intelligibility, and like when we come to understand what friendship is, that reality, that form, that essence forms our intellect, and we know it in that act of union with the thing, the intellect and the intelligible. In the highest fulfillment of the human person, it is God himself who becomes the form of our intellect. That's the beatific vision. That's technically that's the vision here. Now, for the dogmatic commitments that he's got, but he has reasons for it, he will say, you can have this vision without the body. That is, it is Catholic dogmatics that when you die, immediately you receive, this is where eschatology comes in. You either go to hell or heaven or purgatory. So the saints are those who are dead, but enjoy the beatific vision right now, before the resurrection of the body. So that's the technical part. That is, I think there's actually still a mistake. I have the temerity to say this, and I still think that he's leaving something out when he says that their body, that is, I believe this vision is actually true, but I think the faculty psychology view is something that still needs to be contextualized, especially with the Augustinian sense of the person as the fundamental pondus, the weight of the human person. That has to be brought into the picture. So I would just add. And adding, I would say, when Dante shows us at the end of the Paradiso, he kind of shows us the Trinity. He still sees the sacred humanity within the three rings of light. And that for me is something he's a Dante who is very much a Thomist, right? But he's doing his own, he doesn't just follow him slavishly, nor would Thomas really want us to. Dante is, I think, correcting or adding to Aquinas, and that would be the line I would want to follow myself. But just to understand what Aquinas is doing, he's saying, if it is the case, and for a Catholic believer, it is the case, that the saints in heaven already enjoy the beatific vision without their bodies, and it cannot be essential to the beatific vision to have your body. I mean, that's by definition, right? If they already have it without their body, does it add anything when they have the resurrected body? Aquinas, even in these questions, says it does add to it. Okay, we can see whether we're happy with that. But it seems to me, given Thomistic principles themselves, that is, the human is essentially embodied, which is a Thomistic principle, that in some way one wants to also say that the fullness of the human person, the fulfillment, has to involve the body. And so I would say you have to kind of expand that notion of essential here.